Communication. It's something that we pretty much take for granted these days, with the ability to communicate with people all over the world pretty much instantaneously. But it wasn't always this easy. When I was young and I needed to get a hold of someone, I had to use one of these. And if you go back a little further to the early and mid 1800s and you lived in North America or Europe and wanted to communicate with someone across the pond, it was a process that took weeks and sometimes months. That's because all communication had to be sent via ship. So instead of snail mail, there was sail mail. Sorry, can't pass up a bad dad joke. Sometimes the ships hit bad weather and didn't even make the trip. So communicating between the old world and the rapidly growing new world was very difficult and took a very long time. In the 1830s and 40s, a new communication technology was developing, the telegraph. A telegraph message would be sent by sending electrical current pulses along a wire using Morse code. The telegraph allowed instant communication over vast distances for the first time in history. By the early 1850s, telegraph cables were rapidly spreading all over the United States and Europe, but communication between North America and Europe still depended on ships. That's until a group of ambitious engineers and businessmen set out to change that and shrink the world forever by laying an underwater telegraph cable across the Atlantic connecting Britain and the United States. Laying an underground cable across the Atlantic is a big feat even for today. So back in the 1850s, it was a massive undertaking with many, many challenges and took years of planning and effort. This group of men that were crazy enough to attempt this challenge included the inventor of Morse code and telegraph system expert Samuel Morse, along with Frederick Gisborne, Charles Tilston Bright, John Watkins Brett, and American businessman and financier Cyrus West Fields, among others. Fields, who was in the paper business, formed an agreement with Brett and Bright, both Englishmen, to create the Atlantic Telegraph Company, which was incorporated in December of 1856. Fields pushed the project forward with great speed and enthusiasm, as he already started buying cable before the company was even formed. The company board of directors consisted of 18 members from the UK, 9 from the US, and 3 from Canada. The British and US governments also chipped in on the efforts, providing some subsidies as well as ships. The first big decision was what route to choose for the Atlantic underwater telegraph cable. There were already some underwater telegraph cables in place at the time, mostly connecting the British Isles, including Ireland, with London, but the distances were short. No one had attempted anything on the scale of the Atlantic crossing. They weren't even sure that an electric signal could be sent across such a great distance. The longer the cable, the less efficient the telegraph system worked. An electrical phenomenon called retardation of the signal was the root of a lot of problems with the long telegraph wires, and many believed would doom the Atlantic cable. So keeping the route as short as possible was crucial. Where to place the cable on the ocean floor was also important. It was important that the cable be placed on the ocean bed where it wasn't too shallow or too deep. At the time, little was known about the ocean floor. A lot of the ocean surveying at the time was done by dropping a cannonball attached to a long line into the water to measure the depths. It just so happened that the shortest distance for the cable was also believed to be a good depth for the cable. The plan was to run the telegraph wire from Valencia Island off the west coast of Ireland to Newfoundland, Canada. The next challenge was developing a wire capable of transmitting a signal across the ocean. Fields recruited Edward Whitehouse, a British surgeon who dabbled in the field of electricity, as chief electrician. Whitehouse devised a cable which consisted of 7 strands of copper wire twisted together. The copper wires in the middle is what transmitted the messages. This inner core was insulated with layers of gutta percha, which was a natural latex derived from the gutta percha trees in Malaysia. The insulated core was then covered in tarred hemp and wrapped with iron wire. Designers had to get the weight of the cable just right. If it was too heavy, then it would create problems during the cable laying process, but not too light so that the cable would be moved by ocean currents. If you're interested in owning part of the cable, you can occasionally find small sections for sale online. This might have to go on my Christmas list this year. So now that we have a route all planned out and have designed a cable, the fun part begins, laying the cable on the ocean floor. Two specially fitted ships were tasked with laying the first transatlantic cable, the Royal Navy ship the Agamemnon and the American Niagara. The ship set sail from the west coast of Ireland on August 6, 1857. Engineers decided that it would be best to string the cable in one direction, east to west, so they could always maintain a connection with land. The Niagara went first, and the Agamemnon followed. When the Niagara ran out of cable, the line would be spliced, then the Royal Navy steamship would take over to finish the trip. With the help of paying out machines, the cable was to be laid out at a speed consistent with the speed of the ships, but at one point the cable began to move about 50% faster than the ship. To stop the overrun, the brakes were set on the paying out machine. As the ship rose to the top of the next wave, the pull on the cable was too great, snapping the cable. Fields and the Atlantic Telegraph Company needed to regroup and replan. The next attempt at laying the cable happened the following summer. Using what they learned from the first trip, the brakes on the paying out machine were tweaked so that they were smaller and lighter, and most importantly featured a self-regulating function to prevent the cable from snapping. Another change from the first trip was that both ships would start in the middle, splice the cable, and each would lay the cable in opposite directions. Doing this would allow both ships to communicate with each other via the cable. This time Mother Nature proved too much. A June 10th storm almost destroyed the Agamemnon, knocking the ship 200 miles off course and injuring 45. The cable suffered a series of electrical and mechanical setbacks. After making 2 attempts, which both resulted in cable snapping, the ships returned to shore to regroup once again. The ship set out on July 17, 1858 for another attempt. There's a saying that I love, persistence is a superpower, and this time, their persistence paid off. Mother Nature also cooperated, and they were finally successful with both ships reaching their destinations on August 5th, with the Niagara reaching Newfoundland and the Agamemnon reaching Valencia Island. The Niagara laid 1,300 miles of cable, and the Agamemnon laid 1,020 miles. Don't you love it when a plan comes together? On August 16, 1858, Queen Victoria sent a 98-word note of congratulations to President James Buchanan on their country's success on completing the cable. The message took 16 hours to transmit. The president's reply took 10 hours. But the success of the cable was short-lived. The cable was in the best of shape to begin with because it sat out in the elements for a year between the first and second attempts, damaging the gutta percha. There was also some damages caused by the cable laying machinery. The final blow was when the chief engineer, Whitehouse, insisted on using high-voltage instruments on the line. The cable completely stopped working on October 20th, 1858. Fields and the Atlantic Telegraph Company were completely out of funds. They spent almost 500,000 pounds on the project, roughly 70 million US dollars today, with nothing to show for it. The British had some interest in trying again, but American interest had waned, especially when the Civil War broke out in 1861. In 1865, 7 years after the original cable stopped working, the Civil War was ending, and there was new British financing for Fields to press ahead with another expedition. In those 7 years, there were some key advances in telegraph technology, such as a method that allowed two-way communication along a telegraph. The problems with retardation of the signal were effectively solved, and ways to enhance weak signals over long lines were also developed. This time, Fields wasn't messing around and used one massive ship for the project, the Great Eastern. The 692-foot Great Eastern was by far the largest ship in the world at the time and was able to hold vast amounts of cable. The cable itself was new and improved, learning from the mistakes of the past. Focus was also put on the laying of the cable to make sure no damage was done on the line during the process. The vessel set sail in 1865 and laid 2/3 of the cable before the line failed once again. A year later, more capital was raised for another attempt, and this time the cable was successfully relayed, and more importantly, it worked. The lost cable from the previous year was also recovered and put into service. 8 words per minute could be transmitted through the cable. It cost about £1 a word to send a telegram across the Atlantic, or 150 pounds a word in today's money. The company could charge a lot initially because they operated without competition for the next few years. Fields was vindicated for his ability to hold the project together, and the boom in global communication was on. After the completion of the transatlantic cable, long underwater cables were being laid all around the globe, shrinking the world forever. Thanks for watching. As always, I appreciate it. Please subscribe for more historical videos. Take care.